On the morning Marcus Hale lost everything, the rain over downtown Chicago fell soft and gray, almost gentle, like even the sky didn't want to make a scene. He stood outside the courthouse in a coat that no longer fit the man he used to be, watching his ex-wife walk past him, surrounded by reporters who wanted her opinion and not his. 3 years earlier, she didn't even have her own bank account. She apologized when she spoke too loudly in a room full of his friends. She asked permission before she spent money on her own hairstyle. Now she didn't need his name, his money, or a single word of his apology. Cameras flashed. Someone called out, not Mrs. Hale, never that name again, but Eleanor Voss. She didn't look back. To understand how a quiet woman who once shrank in every room became the most talked about name in the city's tech and marketing world, you have to go back 5 years to a kitchen in a brownstone on the North Side on the night of their 8th wedding anniversary. The night that looked like any other night, right before it became the night that changed everything. 5 years before that morning, Eleanor Voss was 26 years old and broke in the way only ambitious 26-year-olds in big cities are broke. Rent due, 2 jobs, a car that made a strange sound every cold morning. She met Marcus Hale at a crowded tech mixer she almost didn't go to, wearing a dress borrowed from her roommate. He was 28 then, sharp-suited, but not yet famous, running a small software startup out of a shared office with 3 other people and a coffee machine that never worked. He spilled red wine on her sleeve in the first 10 minutes of meeting her and apologized so many times that she finally laughed and told him to stop before she changed her mind about liking him. "You don't even know yet if you like me," he said. "I don't," she said, "but you're trying very hard, and that's something." That was Marcus in those days. Trying hard, hungry, charming in the unfinished way men are charming before life teaches them to stop trying. Please, can I ask for a favor? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Now, let's dive into the story. He proposed on a Tuesday, of all days, in the cramped kitchen of his first apartment. No fancy restaurant, no orchestrated surprise, just spaghetti burning slightly on the stove because he got too nervous to stir it. He'd practiced a whole speech and forgot every word of it the second she turned around, so he just said, "I don't have much yet, but I want to build all of it with you," and held out a ring he'd been saving 3 months to afford. Eleanor said yes, with burnt spaghetti still on the stove behind her. And for years afterward, that smell of slightly charred garlic made her smile instead of wince. They married 18 months later in a backyard strung with lights, and 2 years after that, Eleanor gave up her own marketing job when Marcus's company, Solara Technologies, finally took off and needed someone he trusted running the back end while he chased investors across the country. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself love sometimes means stepping back so the other person can run. She believed, deep down, that the man who once apologized for spilling wine on a stranger's sleeve would never let her feel small. There had been quiet talk of children, too, in those early years, soft conversations over dinner about someday. Marcus always said next year, once the company stabilizes, until enough years passed on that same promise that Eleanor stopped bringing it up at all, telling herself plenty of marriages survive on patience instead of timelines. She didn't yet know she was being patient with a man who had simply moved on to a different plan without telling her. She was wrong. It would take 8 years to understand exactly how wrong. By their 8th anniversary, Solara wasn't a startup anymore. It was a name people recognized, worth more money than Eleanor could keep straight. And Marcus wasn't the same man who used to trip over his own nervous apologies. He wore sharper suits. He spoke slower, like every sentence was a decision made for an audience. He came home later, and when he did, his phone stayed face down on the counter, buzzing in a way it never used to. There had been warning signs long before that small ones Eleanor had folded neatly into excuses. 2 years earlier, Marcus had pushed out his original co-founder, a quiet engineer named Daniel Pierce, who had built half of Solara's early code, offering him a settlement so small that Daniel signed only because his own lawyer warned him fighting would cost more than he'd win. Marcus called it a difficult but necessary business decision. Eleanor remembered feeling uneasy at the time, the way you feel uneasy walking past a dog that hasn't bitten anyone yet, but watches you a little too closely. She told herself a man could be ruthless in boardrooms and still be soft at home. She didn't yet understand that the two were never as separate as she wanted them to be. Eleanor noticed the way you notice a room getting colder, slowly, then all at once, until you're standing there in a sweater, wondering when winter arrived. She still planned their anniversary dinner. She bought the wine he liked, the same brand from the night they met, and wrapped a small leather watch in blue paper, because 8 years felt like something worth marking properly, even after months of feeling like she was living with a roommate who used to love her. At 7, he texted that he was running late. At 8, he texted that a deal was closing. At 9, Eleanor sat alone at a table set for 2, candles burning down to stubs, and something in her chest told her, quietly but clearly, that this had nothing to do with a deal. She didn't call. She didn't text back. She grabbed her coat, the wrapped watch still in her purse, and drove to the Solara office downtown, telling herself the whole way that she was wrong, that she would walk in and find her husband buried in spreadsheets and feel foolish for ever doubting him. She was not wrong. The Solara offices took up the top 2 floors of a glass building on Wacker Drive, and at 9:40 on a Tuesday night, only a handful of lights still burned. Eleanor used the key card Marcus had given her years earlier, one she'd never needed before, and walked past empty desks toward the corner office with his name etched into the glass door. She heard a laugh before she realized it wasn't her own. Through the half-open blinds, she saw Marcus leaning against his desk, tie loosened, and Tessa Peters, his 29-year-old executive assistant, the same woman who sent Eleanor a cheerful holiday card every December, standing close enough that there was no version of this Eleanor could explain away. Tessa's hand rested on his chest. His hand rested on her waist. Nobody had expected the wife to show up with a wrapped watch and an overpriced bottle of wine at 9:40 on a Tuesday. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not yet. She pushed the door open with a steadiness that surprised even her and said, 8 years today, Marcus. I just thought you should know I remembered. Tessa stepped back so fast she knocked a folder off the desk. Marcus didn't even look ashamed, only inconvenienced, the way a man looks when a meeting runs long. Eleanor, he started. Don't, she said. Don't say my name like you're about to fix this with a sentence. He straightened his tie. That was the detail she would remember years later, in interviews, in quiet moments alone, that he straightened his tie before he straightened anything else. We should talk at home, he said. Not here. We're talking here, Eleanor said, since this is apparently where you actually live. He didn't deny it in the car, and he didn't deny it the next morning either, sitting across from her at the kitchen island, where she'd once pictured them growing old together. He simply confirmed it, in the calm, rehearsed voice of a man who had already made peace with hurting her. I want a divorce, Marcus said, the way someone announces a merger. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Eleanor's hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. 2 years, Marcus, with Tessa, while I managed your company's books for free? This isn't about Tessa, he said, which was its own kind of lie. This is about who I am now versus who I was when we married. I'm not that broke kid in the bad suit anymore. I built something. I need a partner who matches where I'm going, not someone holding on to where I used to be. He paused. Like even he understood the next part would land harder than anything he'd said so far. Tessa's pregnant, Eleanor. I'm going to have the family I actually want. Some part of this was always coming, whether you want to admit that or not. Eleanor's hands tightened around the mug until her knuckles went white. Of all the ways she had imagined this conversation, she hadn't imagined that one. I held your company together for 3 years so you could go, chase investors, Eleanor said, voice shaking but not breaking. I'm not a chapter you outgrew. I'm half the reason there's a company to outgrow from. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, like he'd practiced this exact moment in a mirror. Legally, Solara is mine. I built it before we married, and you were never on payroll. You'll be fine. Marketing, maybe, like you used to do. He said it the way people describe a hobby, not a career she'd sacrificed for him. I'm not trying to be cruel, Eleanor. I'm trying to be honest. You don't fit where I'm headed anymore. She looked at the man she'd loved since a spilled glass of wine in a noisy room. And for the first time in 8 years, she didn't see someone worth fighting to keep. She saw someone worth fighting. Period. Fine, she said quietly. Get your lawyer. I'll get mine. She walked out to her car and sat behind the wheel a long time before she turned the key, hands trembling in her lap. The wrapped watch from the night before still sitting at the bottom of her purse like a relic from a marriage that had just quietly ended over coffee. She didn't drive away right away. She just sat there, breathing, letting the first wave of grief move through her before she had to be strong enough to drive. That night, Eleanor sat on the bathroom floor of a guest room she'd be sleeping in until the house was sold, and called the only person who always picked up. He's leaving me, she said, before Maggie even said hello. For Tessa, the assistant, the one who sends us a Christmas card with a golden retriever on it every year. Margaret Doyle, Maggie to everyone who loved her, didn't waste time on shock. She'd known Marcus long enough to never fully trust the version of him that wore expensive suits. Where are you right now? She asked. Home, for now. I'm coming over. Don't let him talk to you alone again until you have a lawyer who isn't his. Maggie arrived 20 minutes later with a duffel bag and the kind of fierce, practical love that never asks permission to show up. She sat on the bathroom floor beside her best friend and let her cry the kind of crying that comes out sideways, ugly and loud. 8 years of swallowed doubt, finally given a voice. Somewhere in the middle of that long night, Eleanor remembered something her mother used to say, back before she passed. Back when Eleanor was a teenager, scared of every opinion in every room. Her mother would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and say, never let one person's verdict become the whole truth about who you are. Eleanor hadn't thought about that sentence in years. She thought about it now like a hand reaching back through time to steady her. You gave up your career for him, Maggie said. You ran his books for free. You hosted his investors, smiled through his work dinners, and put your own ambition in a drawer so his could breathe. He doesn't get to erase 8 years with one sentence about who he is now. He says Solara is his, that I have no legal claim to any of it. Maggie's jaw tightened. Then we find someone who knows exactly how to prove him wrong. The following weekend, Eleanor packed 8 years of her life into cardboard boxes, while Marcus stayed conveniently absent, supposedly closing another deal. She stood in the closet for 10 minutes, holding a single picture frame from their wedding day, unsure whether to pack it or leave it for whoever bought the house next. She packed it. Not because she still wanted it, but because she refused to let him decide what she got to keep. The isolation came faster than the heartbreak. Couples they'd known for years, people who had eaten dinner at their table and toasted their anniversaries, stopped returning her calls the moment word of the divorce spread through their social circle. A woman named Renee, who Eleanor had once considered a close friend, sent a single text that read, "I just don't want to get in the middle of this," and never wrote again. It stung in a way Eleanor hadn't expected, losing an entire social world built around a marriage that no longer existed. Maggie found her sitting alone at brunch one Sunday, the seats around her empty for the first time in years. "You don't need 10 fake friends," Maggie told her, sliding into the seat across from her without asking. "You need 3 real ones. I'll be the first. We'll find the other 2. Eleanor managed a small laugh, the first real one in weeks. "Where do we even start?" "With a lawyer," Maggie said, "and then with you remembering you're allowed to take up space in your own life again." That same week, Eleanor pulled an old camera out of a closet box, the kind with actual film that she used to carry everywhere before marriage, quietly convinced her hobbies were a luxury for people with more free time than purpose. She spent a Saturday afternoon photographing nothing important: a chipped coffee cup, a stranger's dog through a fence, light falling across her own kitchen table, just to remember what it felt like to do something for no reason except that she wanted to. It wasn't a grand turning point. Nobody applauded. But it was the first hour in months that belonged entirely to her, and that, Maggie told her later, was exactly where rebuilding always starts. Vivian Cross's office didn't look like a place where marriages ended. It looked like a place where they got taken apart carefully, piece by piece, until the truth underneath finally showed itself. Vivian herself was 61, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain, with a reputation across Chicago for being the lawyer wealthy men feared most in a divorce. She built that reputation by never once losing a case where a husband underestimated his wife. She listened to Eleanor's whole story without interrupting, took notes in handwriting too neat for someone who'd clearly written thousands of pages of testimony, then set her pen down. "Tell me something," Vivian said. "During the marriage, did you ever sign anything tied to Solara's finances? Loans, tax filings, anything with your name on it?" Eleanor thought back. "I managed the books early on. I signed quarterly filings for the first 3 years, before he hired a finance team." Vivian's eyebrows lifted slightly, the only sign she gave that something interesting had just landed in her lap. "After that finance team came in, did the numbers ever feel strange, inconsistent?" "There were transfers near the end I didn't recognize. Marcus said they were investor payouts." "Do you still have access to any of those old records?" "I kept copies," Eleanor said slowly. "I don't know why. Habit, I guess." For the first time since Eleanor walked in, looking like a woman who'd already lost a war before it started, Vivian Cross almost smiled. "Good habit," she said. "Bring me everything you have. Men like Marcus Hale don't just hide affairs. They hide money. And if there's one thing courts in this state respect more than a broken heart, it's a paper trail." Over the weeks that followed, Vivian's team combed through years of records Eleanor had quietly saved without ever knowing why. They found wire transfers to shell companies registered in states Marcus had never done business in. They found invoices for consulting work from firms that didn't exist outside a mailbox. They found a pattern: money moving out of Solara right before major funding rounds, then disappearing into accounts with Marcus's name nowhere on them, but his fingerprints all over them. "This isn't just hiding assets from you," Vivian told Eleanor one morning, sliding a folder across the table. "This looks like he's been hiding money from his own investors too. That's not a divorce problem anymore. That's a fraud problem." Marcus didn't take the investigation quietly. Against his own lawyer's advice, he called Eleanor directly, his voice tight with something that wasn't quite panic yet, but was getting close. "Whatever you think you found, drop it," he said. "You don't understand what you're playing with." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "You're worried I found something real." "I built that company from nothing," he snapped. "You will not take it from me with a few old spreadsheets." "I'm not taking anything," Eleanor said, surprising herself with how calm her own voice sounded. "I'm just finally telling the truth. You're the one who spent years hiding it." He hung up without another word. Eleanor sat there a long moment, staring at her phone, feeling something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not fear, not anymore. 3 days later, Marcus's lawyer called Vivian with an offer, a lump sum, paid quickly and quietly, if Eleanor dropped the financial investigation and signed away the right to ever speak of it. The number was large enough to make her hands tremble when Vivian read it aloud. "It's more than the trial might even get you," Vivian admitted. "That's your decision, not mine." Eleanor sat with the number for a night before she answered. "If I take it, he gets to keep pretending none of this happened and keep hurting people the same way he hurt me. I didn't go through this just to get paid to stay quiet." "Then we go to trial," Vivian said, "and we make sure the truth doesn't come with a price tag." Marcus tried a different angle 2 weeks later. A business blog Eleanor had never heard of published a piece quoting an anonymous source close to the couple, painting her as a bitter ex-wife chasing a payday from a man who'd built his fortune through nothing but his own talent. The story spread through the city's tech circles fast, the way ugly stories always travel faster than kind ones. 2 recruiters who had reached out about marketing roles suddenly stopped returning her calls. "Let it sit for a day," Maggie warned, watching Eleanor pace her small apartment with her laptop open to the article. "Don't respond from anger, respond from truth." When a reporter finally asked Eleanor directly for comment, she didn't deny being hurt, and she didn't pretend to be anything other than a woman fighting for what she'd earned. "I ran that company's finances for 3 years without a single paycheck," she told the reporter, steady and plain. "I'm not chasing a payday. I'm asking for what was always mine. People can call that bitter if they want. I call it honest." The quote ran the next day, and for the first time, public opinion began quietly shifting in her direction, one reader at a time. It was that same week that Eleanor applied to 11 different marketing jobs before Bellwether and Finch, a boutique creative agency 3 floors above a coffee shop, finally called her in. The creative director, a tired-looking man named Felix Bennett, flipped through her old portfolio with visible doubt. "This is from 8 years ago," he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "I spent those 8 years running operations and finance for a company now worth $400 million. I didn't lose my skills. I just stopped using them on myself." Something in her tone made Felix look up properly for the first time. "I read that piece about you," he admitted, "and then I read your response to it. That's the part that got you this interview, if I'm honest." He gave her a junior position, the kind usually meant for someone half her age. and Eleanor took it without complaint, arriving early, staying late, rebuilding muscles she hadn't used in years. It wasn't easy. Her second week, a client meeting went sideways when an older account manager openly questioned in front of the whole room whether someone out of the industry for 8 years should be trusted with strategy at all. Eleanor felt the old instinct rise, the urge to shrink, apologize, disappear into the wallpaper the way she had for years inside her marriage. Instead, she opened her laptop, pulled up 3 competitor campaigns she'd analyzed the night before, out of nothing but stubborn preparation, and walked the room through exactly why their current approach was losing market share. The same account manager hired her personally for his next project. Within 4 months, a campaign she designed for a struggling client tripled their online engagement. Within 6 months, Felix gave her a small team of her own. "You're wasted here," he told her honestly one evening, the two of them the last to leave the office. "Bigger agencies are going to notice you soon, and we can't pay what they'll offer." "Let them notice," Eleanor said, and for the first time since that night in the glass-walled office, she meant every word of her own confidence. The notice came 8 months later in the form of an email from Orion Technologies, Solara's biggest rival in the city's tech scene, a company that had spent 3 years trying to outpace Marcus Hale at every turn. They wanted Eleanor to lead a full rebrand of their consumer products division. The irony wasn't lost on her. The salary offer made her laugh out loud, alone in her apartment, until the laugh turned into something closer to tears. Her first real conversation with Theodore Marsh, Orion's CEO, happened in a conference room at 8 in the evening, both of them the only 2 people left on the floor, comparing notes on a campaign neither of them liked yet. "Your old portfolio mentions 8 years in finance and operations," Theo said, scanning her file. "Then nothing. Then suddenly you're the best creative director in the city. What happened in between?" "Life happened," Eleanor said simply. "I put my career down for a while. I'm picking it back up." Theo studied her a moment longer than the conversation required. "Most people who put something down that long never pick it back up this well." "Most people don't have a good enough reason," she said. He didn't push for more, and she appreciated that more than he could know. Over the following weeks, their working relationship deepened into something neither of them rushed. Long conversations over takeout containers at 9 at night. Easy laughter over failed campaign ideas. A kind of comfortable honesty Eleanor hadn't felt in years, maybe ever, not even with Marcus in the early days. Theo never once made her feel like a chapter he was waiting to outgrow. He made her feel like someone worth slowing down for. It was a Thursday night in late autumn when Theo finally said what they'd both been carefully not saying for weeks. They stood on the rooftop deck of the Orion building, city lights stretched out below, a bottle of wine between them that neither had touched much. "I should tell you something," Theo said, "and you can tell me to mind my business." "Go ahead." "I know about the divorce. I know who your ex-husband is. Half the tech world does." He paused. "Whatever he told you about not fitting where he was headed, that man has no idea what he gave up." Eleanor felt her throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. "You don't know me that well yet." "I know enough," Theo said. "I know you rebuilt an entire career from nothing while fighting a legal battle most people would have crumbled under. I know you walk into rooms full of men twice as loud as you and somehow end up being the only person anyone remembers afterward." He set his glass down on the railing, and for once his voice lost its usual calm. "I'm not in a hurry, Eleanor. I just didn't want to keep pretending I haven't fallen in love with you." The noise of the city below seemed to fall away. Eleanor felt her own heartbeat before she felt anything else. Loud and unfamiliar, the way it used to feel at the very beginning with someone else. Except nothing about it felt like a warning this time. She crossed the small distance between them, and when he kissed her, slow and certain, his hand finding the curve of her jaw like he'd been waiting months for permission. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't desperate. It felt like the first deep breath after holding it for years. When they finally pulled apart, Theo rested his forehead against hers, both of them a little out of breath, the wind pulling at her hair. "I don't want to rescue you, Eleanor," he said quietly. "I just want to be the reason you never have to wonder again whether you're loved properly. No conditions attached." "That's a lot to offer a woman who still has divorce papers in her bag," Eleanor said, laughing through tears she hadn't expected. "Good," Theo said. "Then you'll know exactly what real love looks like, because it'll still be standing here long after the papers are signed." It felt, for the first time in years, like coming home to a house that had never once made her feel small. Maggie met Theo 2 weeks later, over dinner at a small Italian place Eleanor picked specifically because the tables sat close enough together that nobody could hide behind small talk. She watched her best friend study Theo through the entire meal with the sharp, protective eyes of someone who had already watched one charming man turn out rotten underneath. By dessert, Maggie excused Eleanor to the restroom under a flimsy pretense and turned to Theo alone. "I'm going to ask you one question," she said, "and I need an honest answer, not a polished one. Why her?" Theo didn't flinch. "Because she's the only person I've met in this industry who never once asked me to make her feel important. She just is. I'm not trying to rescue her from anything. I just don't want to miss being part of her life." When Eleanor returned, Maggie gave her the smallest nod under the table, the kind that meant more than a paragraph of words ever could. A few weeks later, lying on the couch in his apartment with her head against his shoulder, Eleanor finally said the thing she'd been avoiding. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Not of you, of believing this is real and being wrong again." Theo didn't rush to comfort her with easy words. He thought about it first, which she'd come to learn was simply how he was built. "I can't promise you I'll never make a mistake," he said. "Nobody honest can promise that, but I can promise you'll never have to wonder where you stand with me. You'll never catch me pretending. If something's wrong, I'll tell you." He tilted her chin up gently until she was looking at him. "I love you, Eleanor. Not the version of you that survived him. All of you. The whole story, every messy piece of it. And I plan on taking care of you for a very long time. Not because you need rescuing, but because that's simply what I want to do with my life now." "That's a strange kind of romantic," Eleanor said, half laughing through the tightness in her throat. "It's the only kind I trust," Theo said. "The rest is just performance." She fell asleep on his shoulder that night for the first time, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, didn't dream about glass office doors or wrapped watches or candles burning down to nothing. As the trial date approached, Marcus's world began closing in from every direction. Investors who once trusted him started asking pointed questions about Solara's finances. 2 board members resigned quietly. And the same week, Tessa Peters, 7 months pregnant with the child Marcus had once called the start of his new life, walked into his office to drop off papers and found him with someone else entirely, a young associate from his own defense firm, an affair already months deep behind her back. She didn't scream. She simply turned to leave, the same way Eleanor once had, except her legs slipped before she reached the elevator, and she fell down hard on the marble floor. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what she'd already feared in the ambulance. She had lost the baby. 3 days later, still raw with a grief that had nothing left to do with loving Marcus and everything to do with surviving him, Tessa called Vivian Cross's office and asked if she could speak with Eleanor too. "I have emails," she told them both, voice unsteady but determined, a laptop bag clutched in her lap like something she needed to hold on to. Instructions from Marcus about moving funds before investor audits. I didn't understand what I was helping with at the time. I do now. Eleanor, sitting quietly across from her, felt no satisfaction watching another woman discover exactly what Marcus was capable of, only a tired, aching recognition. "He does that," Eleanor said softly, "makes you feel chosen right up until the moment he needs someone else to blame." "I'm sorry," Tessa said, "for all of it." "Make sure your evidence is solid," Eleanor told her. "That will matter more than an apology ever could." The case went to trial in January, and it didn't take long for the courtroom to fill with more reporters than a private divorce hearing usually attracts. Vivian laid out the wire transfers, the shell companies, and the forensic evidence in one steady, relentless presentation, then called Tessa to confirm under oath what she had already told them in that office. Investors who had trusted Marcus with their retirement savings took the stand one after another. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, the same calm, rehearsed voice that had worked on her at their kitchen table didn't work in a room full of strangers who had never spent 8 years convincing themselves he was a good man. Theo sat quietly in the back row through all 11 days of it, never once needing credit for being there. The judge didn't waste time softening her ruling. She gave Eleanor 70% of the marital assets, additional compensation for years of unpaid labor, and a written finding that Marcus had deliberately tried to financially erase the very woman who helped build what he was now fighting to keep. The fraud case didn't stop there either. Federal investigators opened their own inquiry within weeks, and by summer, a grand jury indicted him on multiple counts of wire fraud, built almost entirely on the same shell companies Vivian had once laid out across a quiet office table. By the time the indictment made the news, Marcus Hale wasn't running a tech company anymore. He was meeting with criminal defense attorneys instead, watching his name disappear from a building he once walked into like he owned the entire world. Because for a while, in the worst way possible, he had. He sold the downtown penthouse within the year, trading it for a rented unit 2 train stops further out than he ever imagined living. The valet at his old building, a young man named Curtis, who used to greet him by name every single morning, looked right past him on the sidewalk the week the moving truck came. The way people look past someone who no longer matters in a world built entirely on appearances. Marcus noticed. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Tessa didn't stay in Chicago much longer after she and Marcus broke up. She took a job with a small marketing firm in Denver, far enough from Marcus. It wasn't a redemption story anyone wrote headlines about. It was just a woman quietly putting her life back together, the same way Eleanor once had, in a city where nobody yet knew her as anything other than new. 2 months after the ruling, Theo took her back to the same rooftop where he'd first kissed her. The city skyline lit up gold against an early evening sky. He didn't make a long speech. He simply got down on one knee, his hands a little unsteady for a man usually so composed in every boardroom, and said, "I don't want to be your rescue, Eleanor. I just want to be your home, if you'll let me." She said yes before he even finished opening the small box in his hand, laughing through tears for the second time that year. this time for an entirely different reason. A year later, Eleanor stood backstage at a business conference downtown, waiting to give a keynote talk called Starting Over Without Starting Small. She'd been named creative partner at Orion Technologies 6 months earlier, the youngest partner in the company's history, and her rebrand work had become the most studied case in the city's marketing circles. In the audience, second row, Theo watched her walk onto the stage with the quiet pride of a man who never once needed her to be smaller than she was. They'd been married 4 months by then, in a small ceremony in Maggie's backyard, string lights overhead, nothing like the wedding Eleanor had once imagined with Marcus, and somehow far more like the love she'd actually deserved all along. At that wedding, Maggie had stood beside her, holding the bouquet, crying louder than anyone, including the bride. Theo had written his own vows on a single index card he kept losing in his jacket pocket all morning, and when he finally read them under the string lights, his voice cracked on the same sentence twice. "I don't need you to need me," he said. "I just want to be the place you come home to." There had been no orchestra, no extravagant venue, no audience of business contacts pretending to care. Just the people who had actually shown up for her in a small backyard under lights that reminded her, on purpose, of where two very different love stories had once begun. 5 years ago, Eleanor told the room, voice steady under the stage lights. "Someone told me I didn't fit where he was headed. He was right in a way. I didn't fit into his plan to erase me quietly and keep all the credit for himself. So I built my own plan instead." The room laughed, then applauded. Somewhere across the city, in a much smaller office than the one he used to own, Marcus Hale sat alone, reading a headline about her keynote speech on a phone he could no longer afford to upgrade, surrounded by a silence that no amount of money had ever managed to fill. 2 years after that keynote, Eleanor gave birth to triplets, 3 healthy babies who turned her and Theo's quiet brownstone into a warm, loud kind of chaos. Neither of them had quite let themselves hope for out loud. She liked to joke, exhausted and glowing in the same breath, that life seemed to be paying her back with interest. Privately, she had come to believe it hadn't only been luck. She liked to say God had been quietly rearranging the pieces of her life long before she understood the shape they were forming, clearing away a marriage built on lies just in time to make room for one built on something real. Theo, she had come to think, was never simply a coincidence. He was the answer to everything she had quietly hoped was still possible. That same gray, rainy morning outside the courthouse, the one this whole story opened with, was the last time Marcus ever stood close enough to watch Eleanor's life unfold in person. After that, all he had left were headlines from a distance, and eventually, even those stopped mentioning his name at all. Eleanor's story isn't really about revenge, even though it's tempting to call it that. It's about what happens when someone tries to convince you that you're disposable, and you decide, quietly and completely, to prove them wrong. Not by becoming bitter, but by becoming whole. She didn't win because she hated Marcus enough. She won because she finally loved herself enough to stop accepting his version of her story. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.